See, that's what Mario's not here. And Fred. Good evening and welcome to the 905th meeting of the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. And tonight we are being served by Bruce, who is, I guess he's put some pheasant, we got pheasant under glass and a couple of separate things for us. Our speaker tonight is Rich Nugent, who's going to talk about observing satellites. And I put this together just this morning. I had, and I'll announce this a little later on, something came up that I had to add to this. So we didn't have a speaker for next month, but I got a contact from the Amateur Astronomy group that's out in Amherst, Massachusetts, the 5A Club, and they asked me if I'd give a talk. And the person who sent the email was talking about this talk that he had done. So I kind of said, "You're trying to throw a hint." So I said, "You're welcome to come to see us." And I said, "You probably want to come during this later in the spring, so you don't fight the snow." And he said, "No, I'll come next month." So he's going to be booked. It's Kevin Collins, and I believe he's the one that did that reconstructing a 12-inch telescope. So he's going to come out and talk about his eclipse adventure last summer. So he will be our speaker for next month, and I'll put something for the newsletter on the website. Secretary's report. Will that Phil Levine come up?
Here's a summary of the ATMoB meeting held December 14, 2017 here at the Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in the Phillips Auditorium. Club President Glenn Chappell called the meeting to order at 8 p.m. The Secretary, Treasurer, Membership, Observing, and Clubhouse reports were presented. For details, please see the newsletter or YouTube video. Announcements: Stella Kafka, President of the AABSO, made an award presentation to ATMoB member Mario Mata. Mario was recipient of the AABSO's William Tyler Alcott Award, presented to a member of the AABSO organization for outstanding contributions in mentoring, promoting variable star astronomy. A new book on binoculars by accomplished optical author William J. Cook entitled Binoculars, Fallacy and Fact was reviewed. New business: eclipse patches celebrating the August 2017 total solar eclipse are available for purchase. See John Reed if interested. The guest speaker for the evening was Peter Scherf. His talk was entitled Meteorites 101, What They Are, Where They Come From, and How We Find Them. A number of different meteorite samples were on display at the front of the Phillips Auditorium. Peter relayed stories of interesting meteorite falls, including the observed approach in 2008 of a meteor by astronomer Richard Kowalski, who proactively reported his finding to the Minor Planet Center here in Cambridge, Mass. In 2013, a very large asteroid designated 2012 DA14 had a near miss with Earth. It passed within 17,000 miles, which was within the orbits of our geosynchronous satellites. Glenn Chappell adjourned the meeting at 9:30 p.m.
Thank you. By the way, I belatedly wish everybody a Happy New Year. I got a phone call on New Year's Day that somebody hacked into my credit card, so I spent the rest of the day getting that taken care of. And today I tried to get my car washed, and I couldn't find a puddle deep enough to drive through it. Observing Committee report. I do this every time. I never get this to Bruce in time.
Change the slide.
That's a great picture. Anyway, do you have anything to say about Ario? And then I'll get into what's going on in the sky.
It's probably frozen.
So we got to wait until the spring thaw.
We might be okay after this weekend, actually. I was up there last weekend, shoveled everything off. The heater cables are working fine. So the dome will rotate, but there was enough snow and the temperature was like 11 degrees when I was there, so I didn't want to try to open the shutter.
Yeah. Steve, you've been in the clubhouse for a while observing. Any updates?
Yeah. We actually had 2 work sessions, of course. Do you want me to read the report, or do you want me to?
We can save it for when you give the regular clubhouse.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you an update.
That'll look okay. All right. Anyway, what's going on? I went through the calendars and things, and on Friday, I don't know what that's doing there. That's the wrong one. Double check. Saturday. Unless I forgot. Let's skip that. I was rushing to get this done. That doesn't look right. Does anybody recognize those dates for any reason? Now, let's just go on. I'm sorry about that.
Right. Tomorrow's January 12th.
Let me go back. Oh, you know what? I'm a month off in the distance. I'm already working on February. We are good. Today is what, the 11th of?
Yes.
Welcome to the time machine. Well, actually, this part I put together so long ago, I've totally forgotten it. In fact, it's so bad, I get the current issue of Astronomy magazine, I was thumbing through the pages, and I see this article about small telescope astronomy. I said, why the hell didn't they ask me to write that article? And then I saw my name, I did write it. So it's always a surprise. I am sorry, so we are good. Tomorrow, double check, actually, you know what, it's tonight. And I think we're going to be cloud anyway. There'll be a double shadow transit of Jupiter. It's going to be Ganymede and Europa. It's actually going to happen after midnight tonight, so you can forget about that one.
Also Jupiter doesn't rise until 2 a.m.
Pardon?
Also, Jupiter doesn't rise until after 2 a.m.
Yeah, so it's going to be a bad situation anyway. I think we would have been able to catch the very end part of it, but it would have been low. There are some more though coming up in the spring that I'll be posting as well on our website. On the 13th of January in the morning sky.
I could probably forget about that too.
Yeah, that's going to be very low. Did I put very low?
Also, we're supposed to rain.
Monsoons.
Is there anything we're going to be able to see?
February 4th.
The good thing about algal minimums, they happen a lot. And again, I'm hoping, we did a thing at the clubhouse a number of years ago where I handed out charts so you could actually make an estimate of algal. We did a little run through, first of all, showing what are the different comparison stars, and then about a half a dozen of us actually made estimates probably every 15 minutes. That's plenty good enough for about 3 hours. And you can actually see it drop from about 3.1 to 3.4, and then we were able to catch it on the rise again. So I'm looking ahead of time just to see when I know there's going to be some good weather, and I'll put something out if anybody wants to show up at the clubhouse, and we can check out a minimum of algal. It's kind of an interesting star to follow.
Well,
Yep.
there might be a football game on that night.
God, you wrecked the whole thing. So it's clouds and football. Forget about this.
Yes, there's also a lunar eclipse on the 31st. We will barely be able to see it. In theory, if we were an atmosphereless planet, we would see the totality for 6 minutes before the moon sets.
So we're going to miss that as well because the Earth will be in the way.
The Earth will be in a way. I mean, the penumbra, you know, it's not close to the penumbra, so there'll be some darkening when it's before it.
So essentially, crappy month for observing.
Good month for internet astronomy.
Yeah. All right, the LVAS Observers Challenge. And this month, it's one I've never heard of. It's NGC 1624, which is apparently a cluster and a nebula. And I haven't been out lately just because it's ridiculous with this cold. It's the one thing that just survived the cold, but for me, I mean, my eyes tear up and then the lens doesn't just fog up, it ices up. But we get this warmer weather and some clear nights. That should be a good one to look for. And Roger Iverson said it was surprisingly easy in his 10-inch scope. So, and he has magnitude 5 sky, so that's something to look for. The Sioux French Fan Club, she did an article called The Hidden Queen, and I picked one called Berkeley 4. It's an open cluster in Cassiopeia. There should have been a chart, oh, here it is, right over here. It's way over in the outer part of Cassiopeia. Right, there it is, right here. Oh no, there's Berkeley 4. It's not that far from Gamma. You'll have to star hop your way up, but there's a bunch of clusters in there. Most of the ones she features are pretty faint, but Berkeley 4 looks like an interesting one because those of you in the front row can probably see this as well. There's a double star there. And it kind of reminds me of NGC, is it 476? It's the ET cluster. It's kind of get that same idea with a bright double star in the middle of it. So anyway, that's something to look for. Just read her article in the January issue of Sky and Tell. She does a lot of very obscure clusters in Cassiopeia.
Well, I just noticed that picture of Sue makes it look like she's about 19 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it probably was taken when she was 19 years old.
How old is she? She's probably...
Billions and billions.
What
Jupiter is.
29.
29. And we'll have Rich come up and talk about, the only thing I like, you wrote a list there, you had M2, and I figured that's gone right now because you were beaten to the punch for January.
Well, these are some nice objects if you want to get out there and take a look at them. The galactic cluster 663 in Cassiopeia is another, sort of an off the beaten path cluster, but it's a really pretty cluster of stars to look at. One of my favorite galaxies to look for in the autumn skies and the winter skies too is NGC 404, Mirac's Ghost. Probably the most commonly discovered comet in the sky right up here.
Oh.
And
Here you go.
That, I get used to it before I have to actually use it.
It's fun to use it.
Which is that little red thing now? Oh yeah, look at that. So there's the galaxy right there. You have to almost look past the glare of Mirac to see it, but it's a pretty nice galaxy. A little faint, it's tiny, you gotta look for it, but it's there, that's kind of neat. And since we're getting into the winter sky, Omicron 2 Eridani is a nice star system that is kind of red, white, and blue. This is a white dwarf star here. It's probably the easiest white dwarf star in the sky to see. That's a red dwarf. And I can't remember the spectral class of this one.
Same like the sun, G-type.
It is, okay. So this is a really, really pretty system. It's easy to find as well. Just have to go and, ferret it out of the sky. But it's nice because you get to show people a nice white dwarf right there. And just in honor of Joe Henry, there's his S. Cephi. He's the carbon star guy. He and I duke it out all the time about carbon stars. I like R. Lepores as my favorite star. And he likes S. Cephi. Like I think I wrote up somewhere, begrudgingly, he won the last time we were at the clubhouse together. His star was redder than my star.
Oh, it's amazing.
But R. Lepores is a very, very red star. These are carbon stars. They're very cool. They've got carbon molecules in their atmosphere. So cool red stars that don't give off a lot of blue light to start with. And the carbon molecules in the atmosphere of these stars actually absorb blue light to make them even more red. So these things are the reddest stars you'll ever see. They're really amazing to look at. They're a little bit faint, but they're worth a hunt. So S. Cephi in the fall, R. Lepores in the winter. Those are really nice things to go and look for. So there's just a few things to, you may not have ever looked at those things before, but they are kind of cool. So anyway,
thank you.
You can have this back.
Thank you very much. Actually, if you've never seen a white dwarf, this is the easiest one, probably the easiest one to see, because with my little 3-inch telescope, I was able to split these two. No way with that little red dwarf. That takes a bigger telescope.
That's faint.
Thanks to Steve, with the 18-inch scope, we saw it with that scope. I'm not sure what the smallest aperture is to pick that one up, but that's
That
it's
red
an
dwarf is
amazing
faint.
sight. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the easiest white dwarf in the sky to see.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have any questions, comments? Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, so the observing committee, the club has an observing committee. Glenn, Rich Nugent, and me are on it, and we've been looking for new members. Joe Henry just joined on. Joe was just mentioned by Rich. Joe is one of the deep sky observers that is at the clubhouse any good night, and he wants to run some classes on star hopping to teach people how to, or he typed star hoping, which sometimes that's what it is, but that's what he sent me an email. We're opening it up to a couple of other people to be on the committee to help lead or learn new things about observing. So if you're interested, drop me a note, bruce@scopemaker.com, drop a note to Glenn or to Rich, and just let us know that you're interested in that. Very little to do, as much or as little to do as you want, but we'd like to expand our horizons there. That's number one. Number two, Glenn wrote a couple of articles actually for Astronomy magazine.
I guess.
For February. And the second one was the observing section, where he did a section on Ariana.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And the Citizen Kate effort that our club very generously sponsored. So Glenn wrote the article, talked about Citizen Kate. If you recall, she was one of many people that were involved in recording the total solar eclipse of August 21st from coast to coast, and she had the very last station on the U.S. continent in South Carolina. They were almost clouded out, but she was able to get a minute or so of data, and her data is part of the big picture, if you will. And the article mentions ATMoB and our generosity in helping them raise the $3,600, and also mentioned me. Thank you very much, because I worked one-on-one with Ariana to show her how to set up and use her equipment. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions, comments, complaints, whatever? Plumber. Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Would you like me to tell my story?
Go ahead.
Told you. So, pun intended, fallout from last month's meeting, right? Meteorites. I purchased a couple of meteorites to donate to the Clay Center Observatory, and I brought them last Tuesday to do that. And it turns out, for various reasons, that I'm not going to, at least right away. But while I was there, one of our regulars who is there is a family, and they have a daughter, Karen, who had her 15th birthday that day. And so I thought I'd show her the meteorites. I didn't show too many people because I didn't want it to be too public yet. But one of the meteorites that I had was a lunar meteorite. So I pulled it out of its bag and I put it in her hand and said, "You're holding a piece of the moon." And she was just super, super thrilled about that. Went over, talked to her mother, said, "Hey, you want to hold this? Look at this, it's a piece of the moon." And she just loved it. But the comment and the perspective that her mother had was even better. She said, "You're going to remember this. And when you grow up, there will undoubtedly be tourism to the moon. And I know that when that happens, you're going to go. And when you get there, you're going to look back at the Earth and remember your 15th birthday when that crazy guy gave you a moon ride." Anyway, that was just a fun little story from some operating.
By the way, it brings up when I worked at the planetarium in Fitchburg, and the director at that time would do anything to get a contract from public schools. He'd promise, "We'll do this for you, we'll do that." Well, Comet Kahootek was in the sky at that time, in the morning sky, and I was asked to go over and show them the comet with one of my telescopes. And the science coordinator said, I'm returning this. He said, "I'm returning the moon rock." I said, "What?" He handed me a goldfish bowl with a chunk of styrofoam cut in the bottom to fit the lid and a piece of coal. And I could tell it was coal right away. He said that was, apparently the director had said, "We'll let you use this moon rock if you set up a contract with us." And I bit my cheek until it bled to keep from laughing. But anyway, about a week later, I was in the office, the director's office was further down, and this guy walks in a trench coat, flashes a badge from FBI. He says, "I understand you have an unauthorized moon rock here." There's the door. Wow. It was a piece of coal. Okay. Life is interesting. All right, now Steve, you may come up and present.
Thanks. We've had a busy last month. We had two work parties, a week apart, in fact. The first one was on Saturday the 30th. We had 12 volunteers, primarily to do the prep for the New Year's Eve party. And we owe a big thank you to Eileen Myers and Al Takeda for doing that. Not only did they decorate the place, but Al single-handedly fixed a frozen valve on the sink in the grinding room. And the following week, when we had our second other scheduled work party, Al had to replace a section of pipe. We had one section of pipe that was exposed to outside air, and it was freezing quite a bit, as you can well imagine, with the weather that we've had. So I think you finished that repair last Saturday? He put a piece of PVC pipe around the narrower pipe, the cold water feed, and insulated the outside of it so that warm air would carry through that pipe, and hopefully it won't freeze again. So anyway, time will tell. But anyway, the first one, December 30th, the temperature was warm that day. It was 11 degrees. On the January 6th, it had dropped to 10. We only had 10 volunteers that day, but we did do a lot of work. Aside from the snafu with the plumbing, we had a lot of shoveling, snow blowing, and in fact, we did get to clear off the observatory spruce. Area was in pretty good shape. I roof raked that myself. The ice heaters, the wires were working. I don't know if the dome can rotate. You might want to try that this weekend if you get up there.
Yeah, so I had the flu last weekend, that's why I didn't go.
Yeah, a lot of people did, and it's that cold. So a lot went on. We also owe a big thanks to John Stodiak. I don't think he's here tonight. But John really saved us. Our snowblower wouldn't start during the weekend of the New Year's Eve party. And we had a little bit of snow, but not a lot. So John took the thing home and brought it to a shop, in fact, and they said it would be about a 2 to 3 week wait to get the thing repaired. Well, he went ahead and bought a starter mower for it and installed it himself and delivered it to the clubhouse 24 hours before that last 15-inch storm. So we had it on hand last week when we did our clearing. So we're actually in pretty good shape at the clubhouse. Not all the observing area is open, but several of the pads are open. The observatories are at least accessible, and the clubhouse itself is in good shape. The last problem we had was the heating system. The furnace has clicked off several times in the past few weeks. We're not sure why, except for the fact that it could be the air is so cold, and we have a very long run for our chimney, that cold air is shutting down the system when the heat tries to come on. That's a common problem with old furnaces. So we have a fella coming out next week who's going to take a look at it and possibly replace some parts. So I would ask if anyone's going to the clubhouse this weekend, if they would please check to make sure that the heat is operating. If you get up there, Bruce, would you mind taking a peek?
Sure.
Okay. For those who were checked out.
And if it's not?
If it's not, go downstairs to the furnace, to the burner itself. You'll see a little button, a reset button next to a green light. Hold it in for 2 seconds and release it, and it should come on if the thermostat is up. We left it at 60 to keep it a little bit warmer than usual. So otherwise, we're in pretty good shape. Oh, the next work party is Saturday, February 3rd. The roll-on? Well,
Still take 4 people to push it closed?
It may, but after this weekend, I think it'll be okay. John Marr, in fact, had roof break that. He took the ice and the snow off, along with the rails. So it's doable. It can be done.
Okay.
I'm sure it'll be okay this weekend.
That was a scary night.
Yeah, it was.
Couldn't get it closed?
Yeah, we couldn't get it out.
Me too.
Yeah, it wasn't ice per se. It was just so cold. It was in the single numbers that the steel welded itself. So I went around with a hammer and had to bang on each wheel to free it up. But we did get it closed. So. Thank you. We're always victorious.
I sent out a belated thank you note to Rick, and I can't remember his last name now, from Bentley College for the telescope. And I thank Al for sending some pictures that I can include with the email. But he was really impressed with that roll-top observatory. But I think he had the idea that the main observatory is like a shelf that you slid out and was a roof that stayed still. So I don't know how much of a backyard astronomer he is, but that scope is a great addition to the club. And I thank him on behalf of the club. Some announcements. We're going to have an ATMoB board meeting on the 18th, which will be next week, 7 o'clock at the clubhouse. And I'll put something out on the internet just to remind you, if anybody has anything they'd like to see added to the agenda, please let us know and we'll put it down there. Sky and Telescope, I got a note from Camille Carlisle that there's a summer internship from Sky and Telescope. I'm pretty sure again that I forwarded that to the club. I remember asking Chris if I could do that. But it's ccarlisle@skyandtelescope.com if anybody's interested. It's a summer internship, and I guess it's an editing internship. So if you want to write for the wrong magazine, snap this thing up. No, this should be a good opportunity, all seriousness. I know people that have worked at astronomy as interns, or as they've gone to the other magazine. It's great training. I think of Bob Noya, who was an editor at Astronomy magazine, and then came over to Sky and Telescope. So it's a great opportunity. The CFA website test, and I know probably a lot more. Some of you out here could probably say a lot more like Chris, because you're the one that put the email out to us. But basically, they're field testing a new website, and they wanted us to help test it out for them. So a newsletter went out, and I was a bit concerned. I don't want to get into something where there's an obligation or you put on somebody else's newsletter. But it's pretty straightforward once I figured out what they were doing. And Chris, have you tried it yourself? How many here have tried that website test? Was it any difficulty at all? No. It's pretty straightforward. So I encourage you, if you still have Chris's email, give it a shot. Again, they help us so much, and it'd be nice to help them out as well. So it's just a few questions about where would you go to look for certain information. You're checking to see how accurate the listings are on their website. It took me about 10 minutes, and I'm a klutz with technology, so some of you will probably get it done in a couple of minutes. As far as passing, somebody sent me this note that Robert Sullivan, anybody familiar with him? I guess he's a past member, but he passed away recently. And before I go on, how many of you here are regulars at the Conjunction Convention? Because I was thinking about you. I got an email from Phil Harrington last night, and very sad news for us. Our friend John Davis passed away. And he thinks it was probably from the Parkinson's disease. He passed away on the 3rd of January, rather, about a week ago now. And it was sad news to say the least. So you will no longer see him at the conjunction. I'm thinking of another one, Barlow Bob, who passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. And the same thing, it really hits hard when it's somebody that you've known for so many years. And I was thinking of some of you regulars that show up. I was thinking about you folks, and I knew that would be kind of a tough thing to hear. Maybe, by the way, we'll have a moment of silence for all of our friends and astronomers who have passed away for the past month. Thank you. In fact, he was really big on asterisms, and there are a couple named after him. And Phil did say he's going to apparently feature some of John Davis's asterisms. I think he's looking at his binocular column sometime in June or July, August. So he's going to basically honor John as well. But I remember there was a cluster in Cassiopeia, and I can't remember the NGC number, but he called it the Zipper. It was amazing. He had a bunch of stars paired up like 2 rows of the Zipper. So great guy, and he will be missed. Hey, anybody have any old business to discuss? Yes, Eileen.
I'm still looking for Dick Coyne.
Oh.
Anybody know him? That's the last handbook.
Coin?
And Coyne, C-O-Y-N-E, I think. He signed up at the meeting to get the handbook. And then John Reed apologizes. He couldn't come to the meeting tonight, but he said, please re-announce that he has the solar eclipse patches, and they're absolutely gorgeous. I don't know if you haven't seen them.
No.
I mean, you could still, even if you didn't go on the...
was it last month?
Okay,
Newsletter.
but they're gorgeous. You can frame them, and they're just beautiful. And they're only $6. And then Paul Bellelli was looking for contact information for Anna Hillier, and we do have that.
Yeah, you found something first. Okay.
Yeah, so that is available if anyone wants to contact Anna. She's in Fitchburg right now, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Eileen. Any other old business or any updates? Yes, John.
The CFA, as you know, has a public observatory night every third Thursday of the month, but they're not having one this month, so there will not be a meeting here next week. And there is one in February. There is not one in March. There is one in April and May. So the meetings are going to be February, April, May, this spring.
Okay.
So don't show up here next week expecting to get a talk.
Okay. Any other announcements? Yes.
I have one that's old and one that's new. The Star Party that was going to be in Acton that was postponed because it was too cold we're looking at March 17th. So that would be on a Saturday in Acton at the synagogue that I belong to. We're going to go out and look at the stars. St. Patrick's Day. Well, that's right.
All the Irish kids will be very glad.
Right.
We can go to both.
Look at green stars. And then Steve Feinstein is the coordinator for the big Acton Star Party where they get 500 plus people. And the date is Monday, March 5th. So put that in your calendars because he needs quite a few telescopes set up outside.
I think this year I'm going to switch with Bruce and do his inside presentation. He can do my telescope outside. Okay, Bruce?
I remember, though, you might have a very corny joke, and I'm not a trained comedian, but apparently there's a guy walking down a back street in Dublin, and a guy jumps out with a gun and says, Catholic or Protestant? So he thinks fast as Jewish. And the guy says, I'm the luckiest Arab in Ireland. Any new business? Okay.
Actually, a real quick.
Sure.
I got an email from someone that's not a member. He lives in Chelmsford near the Westford clubhouse. He's got 2 5-year-old twin daughters, and he's interested in checking out the clubhouse. So if you think you're a frequent visitor when the weather moderates, email me your name, and I'll try to put you in touch with him. His name is Mr. Fanny, and
What's his name?
my email. What's that?
What's his name? remember?
Mr. P-A-N-I, I believe, his last name is Pandy, I don't know his first name.
You sent out the email a couple days ago, I
Yeah.
think so, yeah.
But if you want to help mentor him, probably in March, when the weather cooperates, he and his daughters would like to come up and probably become members.
I'll help him out, Phil.
Thank you. You know, that's the thing though, it's just planting the seed of the hobby. I think about that 15-year-old girl with the meteorite. Who knows where things will go, but sometimes things come back to them and you never know. All right, our guest speaker is known to everybody here, Rich Nugent. And I guess you're going to get set up. Al, get set up. So we need an introduction. I don't know what to say about him because I really don't know him. He's a retired teacher, which is why the grin. And I'm thinking after I retired, the Groton Dunstable group gets together at Kimball's for a little retirees get-together in September. We pick the first week school starts so we can blow it. But you know how crowded Kimball's can be, those of you go there. The place was mobbed, and I was with a friend. He said, how are we going to find a group of retired teachers? And I said, find a table with a bunch of people with shit-eating grins. I swear to God, we get there, there's all these people at the table, and there are people going like this. There they are. So Rich is the same way with his SEG. And he's going to talk about satellites. So I'm going to turn the program over to Rich.
Do you have a clicker?
Oh. Is it up there? Did I leave it up there, or?
Left
Oh,
hand.
here it is, right here. It's on the table all the time.
In the lights, Al. All right, let's get, now, Al, which buttons do I push, the little arrows? There we go. Well, good evening, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here talking with everybody tonight. I've given this talk before, so hopefully I won't bore some of you to tears. Every time it's a little bit different. I'm fighting off a little bit of a head cold, so...
Well, a lot of us are like Glenn, forgetting.
Oh, I forget all the time. I'm not even... yeah, days of the week, now that I'm retired, days of the week are just like non-existent, so...
But that's why you have your pill bottle there with the days of the week.
That's what I have, yeah. Oh,
Here's my Thursday pills, it must be Thursday.
Absolutely. Well, the talk, like I said, I've given this before out at the conjunction, and we will miss John out there. He was instrumental in getting Aruna Hill set up all those years ago. So we've lost a good one out there, but it's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. One of my earliest recollections of astronomy was when I was 6 years old. My dad was kind of an amateur astronomer in the sense that he would sometimes take us outside to see things, but didn't know much about astronomy. But he knew that they had launched a satellite, and that we could see it. They used to publish the Times in the newspaper. It was such a new thing. And so he marched us all outside to see Echo go by one summer at evening. There was heat lightning in the air. I was 6. I'm sure he dragged out my younger sister and probably one brother. And I'm going to blame this all on my brother Kevin. Being about 3 years old, he didn't like the heat lightning in the sky and started to cry and made a big fuss, and my dad was forced to bring us in. He went back out to look at his satellite and came back really mad because he claimed that we made him miss the satellite. I've always liked looking at satellites. You know, you guys, you folks have all been out and observed. You know, observing. You see them all the time. Whether you see them with your naked eye or whether you see them zip through your eyepiece field of view. Sometimes I'll actually track them if they go through a field of view. But I've always been interested. So I put this little slide talk together. I'm no expert here, but just some fun information about observing satellites. And so when did it all begin? October 4th, 1957. That was the day when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. And there were a lot of people that got out there and looked at this thing. Sputnik was a pretty small little satellite. It was only about 23 inches in diameter. It had 4 antennas. If you go to the Air and Space Museum in DC, you can see a replica of it hanging from the ceiling. Really, really small. Those 4 antennas sent out a radio beacon. It just beeped and beeped and beeped. And it was a political statement. It basically launched the space age, and it really added to the Cold War. The reason the United States sat up and took notice is because think about what was going on in the 1950s. The Soviet Union had developed nuclear power, and now they had the means to deliver those weapons to wherever they wanted to deliver them, and we did not. We were not quite there just yet. And so Sputnik was a real eye-opener for the United States. People that went out and saw it, Sputnik was so small, and it was only about 6th magnitude. But what most people actually did see was the booster rocket, the upper booster stage that went into orbit as well. That people could actually see with their eyes, and they got out and looked. It was pretty cool. The United States decided we've got to catch up, so we put up Explorer 1 on January 31st, 1958, and that's what the satellite looked like. And it looks like it's a pretty decent sized piece of hardware. you know, when you look at it like that. But when you look at it in this context, it's really, really small. You know, I was thinking about this driving here tonight. You know, we take for granted, now we launch rockets all the time now. SpaceX is going to send up another one this month, a big one. But back in the day, back in the 1950s, it was touch and go. It was dicey trying to get something into orbit. And so the satellites back in the day were really, really small. And there were numerous failures. So I don't have any videos on the slideshow anymore because as time has gone on, they've become a bit problematic. But go home and go up on YouTube and look up early US satellite launch attempts. They were dropping those things off the launch pad left and right. It was not a good time. And it was kind of embarrassing. Here's Vanguard. Vanguard 1 was launched in March of 1958. A little 6.4-inch aluminum sphere could hold, only weigh 3 pounds. And here you can see the satellites loading into the rocket, right up at the top of the rocket. And it's the oldest satellite that's still in Earth orbit. You can actually go out and look at Vanguard 1 if you know where to look for it. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But it's faint. It's about 9th or 10th magnitude when it's at its brightest. But you can go outside and still see Vanguard from 1958. It's kind of cool. You just have to know where to look for it. This is the satellite that my dad dragged us all out that night to see. This is Echo. It's a 10-story high Mylar balloon that NASA put together. This was in a hangar. It was suspended from the, you can't see it, but it was suspended up here. And it was being filled by air here. And, you know, there's a car, and there's some people, just to give it some scale. That was a pretty big piece of hardware. The whole thing weighed about 165 pounds. They lofted it up into orbit. They inflated it with a tiny little bit of air. They also had a backup system, was a solid organic compound that sublimed in the back into space that could keep it inflated if it had experienced any kind of like meteoroid damage. But that was bright. That was the Eisenhower bounced communications off that satellite just to show that they could do it. And it was a passive communication satellite. And it was up for a while. The Echo 1, which is actually Echo 1A, because the first one didn't get to orbit, but Echo 1 and Echo 2 were in orbit until the late 1960s. And so you could go out and see those things. They're pretty bright, considering they were made of Mylar. Pretty cool, right? Well, you know, in the early days when people were starting to think about satellites, before it all happened, there was a guy right here, right at this complex, who was already thinking about satellites, and that was Fred Whipple. And what he put together was Operation Moonwatch. And Operation Moonwatch was, like I said, developed here around 1956. It shouldn't read Project Moonwatch, it should read Operation Moonwatch. And he enlisted an army of amateur astronomers to actually go out and make observations. Now, you needed a telescope to do these observations because the early satellites were really faint. And so you could buy them. When I went back through my my digital Sky and Telescope, I was just joking about all the Sky and Telescope magazines I have at home. I also have the DVD set. The earliest advertisement I could find was from Edmund Scientific in 1956, selling this scope right here, a satellite scope. Now, you could either buy the completed model for just a shade under $50, or you could pay about $12.50, you could buy a kit. In 1956, $50 was a lot of money. The average income, U.S. income, was about $70 a week. And so if you wanted to buy one of these things set up, you had to shell out some pretty good cash. But I'm sure people did. I love these things. I actually have one of these. I actually have one of those.
Go to the top left.
Up here, you like that? That's yours, right? That's yours, yeah. Well, I love flipping back to the ancient Sky and Telescope magazines.
That's my first scope.
Yeah? Look at that, huh?
I still use mine, it still works.
A little later on, you could find ads in the Radio Shack catalog from the spring of 1958 for this telescope here. That's a Moonwatch telescope with a 50mm objective. And one of the references I had gave it a 6.6 degree field of view, but if you get really close up here and squint your eyes really hard and read the technical specs of this thing, they suggested it was about 6 power magnification and gave about a 12 degree field of view. And if you believe what they tell you in the ad, you do the calculations, they were right. Kind of that bad, Clint. So if you want to see one of these bad boys later, at the top, I happen to have one. Here, oh my God. There it is. So here's a Micronta Moonwatch telescope from the 1950s. I don't know who owned it. I would love to know who owned this and where it was actually used. But the way they would set these up is, let me tighten this down. Eyepiece here. there was a little flip door here that you can see, and there's a little mirror. So you actually looked into the telescope this way and, you know, looked at the sky that way. Very comfortably, you could sit down and do it. And here's what people did. Oh, you could also build them yourself for $9. You'd store up some surplus material and then build one of these things yourself. Reasonably easy to do, I suppose. But the way the Moonwatch people worked, I'm gonna have to put this somewhere and knock it over. The way they set this up, yeah, I'll put it right here. They would line up along a meridian, the north-south meridian, and I was thinking about this as well coming here. I don't think people stood there or sat there all night long and just peered into this eyepiece. They must have had some idea of when things like Sputnik would come by. They had to have some idea. If they were sitting there all night looking, you know, I did a test myself when I first got this. I took it out to the back deck and I put it on the table, and I just kind of sort of pointed it towards the east, about halfway up. And it was summertime. And I was thinking to myself, you know, some poor amateur astronomer peered through this thing for hours upon hours, hoping against hope that a little glint of light would move through there. In about 8 minutes, I saw 3 satellites go by. You know, it was just like crazy. I'm like, bah, they would have loved it today. But they were timers. What you would do is if you saw the satellite, you would call out. And what they did was they adjusted the angle so that each one of the observers could see a different part of the sky, overlapping, you know, pieces of the sky. And if they saw something, they would call it out. There was a recorder here and a timekeeper. And they were using that information to not only track the satellites, but they could do some science behind that. They could look at atmospheric density and stuff like that. So that was what Moonwatch was all about. The Moonwatch program went till the mid-70s. I was a little too young to get involved. I just wasn't quite old enough to get involved.
Were they only looking for Russian satellites, or?
I don't know, Bruce. I don't know. I've got a couple of books on it that I have to go back and reread and learn a little bit more about the program. Did anybody here, some of the you know, astronomy's getting a little on the gray side. Anybody here ever participate in Moonwatch? I know there might be some.
I think Paul Vallely did.
I think Paul did.
Henry Hillier did. She was the first one to see Sputnik.
Oh, cool. How cool is that? Probably right up on the roof here, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I think Walter Scott Houston did that out in Kansas. I think he was the first to spot in the United States.
Okay. Very nice. So yeah, that was a pretty popular program. Well, so what does it take to throw a satellite into orbit? You know, if I took this little controller here and I heaved it across the room, the moment it left my hand, gravity would start to pull it down to the ground. Right?
Yep.
So if I shoot a cannonball at a slow velocity, it's only going to go so far before the gravity of the Earth pulls it down. If I want to throw this thing further, I have to throw it faster. So it goes further before gravity pulls it down. That would be like B here. But if you want to put something into orbit, you have to shoot it fast enough so that it literally is falling around the Earth. And what that typically takes is speeds of about 17,500 miles an hour. Most satellites are 200 or so miles higher or higher. And they get out of most of the Earth's atmosphere. And they're going fast enough so that as they try to fall back to the ground is curving away at the exact same rate, if you will. And they never quite hit the ground. They're in orbit. The astronauts are weightless when you see them on board the space station these days because they're literally in free fall. If you cut an elevator cable and let it fall, you'd be in free fall for a little while. Right? But the astronauts never fall back to Earth, but they are constantly falling around the Earth. If you give your satellite, well, too much, if you will, you will leave Earth orbit and head out into space. Most satellites are launched heading east, and they're launched from near the equator. Not all of them, but most of them. Kennedy Space Center is at 28.5 degrees north latitude. French Guiana has got a big launch complex. They're right near the equator. And what they're cashing in on is the rotation of the Earth to impart that velocity to the satellites before they even get off the ground. Everybody in this room right now, at 42 degrees north latitude, is heading east at about 700 miles an hour. And everything is good until if the Earth were to screech on the brakes, we'd all be killed, but it would be cool to see. We'd all head off into the Atlantic Ocean. Everything would be stripped off the ground, and we'd head off to the Atlantic Ocean. So launching a satellite towards the east from nearer the equator gives you some advantage to reduce the fuel. When you talk about satellites, there are things you sometimes hear about. You can put things in circular orbits, but most of the time they're in elliptical orbits with apogee being the furthest point in the orbit away from the surface of the Earth, and perigee being the closest. There's also an inclination to concern yourself about, and that's really what makes satellites visible for different parts of the Earth. If you put a satellite into a 30-degree orbit, then it's only going to pass over the portions of the Earth that lie within plus 30 and minus 30 degrees latitude. If you wanted to see more of the Earth, you increase the inclination, in this case to 60, and now you can see that lots of the Earth is visible over time. If you want to see the entire planet, put your satellite into a polar orbit. And as the satellite orbits in its little orbital plane, the Earth is allowed to rotate underneath it, and given enough time, you'll see the entire surface of the planet. We do it all the time. The Magellan space probe that imaged Venus was in a polar orbit, so that given enough time, they'd be able to radar image the entire surface of the planet. And so a lot of the satellites that you see going north to south, and it seems like they all do. Yeah, my dad was right. He was convinced they were all Russian spy satellites. Convinced it. A lot of Earth observatories do the same thing, because if you want to look at everything, you put yourself into a polar orbit. There are some inclinations that are higher than 90 degrees, but those are kind of rare. The Israelis like to, there's a fleet of satellites that they put up that are 98 degrees, which is kind of an odd inclination. Probably takes a lot of energy to get them into that orbit. But anyway, the ones that I like to worry about sometime are these guys. 28 degrees. The Kennedy Space Center is right here at about 28.5 degrees north latitude. The reason we didn't see a lot of the manned space missions from here up in New England is because we're too far north. They're only a couple of 100 miles high, and we just didn't see them. If you've ever seen the Hubble Space Telescope from up here, it does make passes that are visible in New England, but it's only about 10 degrees above your southern horizon and really faint. I've never seen it. I've tried, but I've never seen it. And so when you're way up here, trying to look at a satellite way down here that's only a couple 100 miles off the surface of the Earth, pretty hard to do. The 52 degree, I wish it said 51.6, because the International Space Station is in a 51.6 degree orbit. That inclination carries it right over the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Russia, which is where they launch a lot of stuff for the space station nowadays, since we haven't quite got a system in place yet. But 52 degrees is a pretty good inclination, and it allows us to see a lot of stuff in there. So anyway, what about visibility? You know what has to happen. The satellite has to be up in the sunlight while we're in the darkness. So during the daytime, unless you're looking at a -8 magnitude iridium flare, you're probably not going to see any satellites during the day. In the middle of the night, when you're standing at the bottom of this well that is the Earth's shadow, you're not going to see too many satellites because they're not in the sunlight. So generally speaking, satellites are best seen right after sunset or right before sunrise when they're up in the sunlight and we're in the darkness. But there are seasonal advantages, to be aware of. Summertime in the northern hemisphere, there's your 51.6 degree inclination for the International Space Station. That would put us right about there. On June 21st, at local midnight, the sun here in New England is about 24 degrees below the northern horizon. That's just barely below the horizon, right? So the shadow of the Earth is pretty shallow, and you can see satellites all night long in the early summer. You can, if the space station is making passes, you can go out every 92 minutes and watch them go by on a summer night because they're always up in the sunlight from our vantage point. On the other side of the game, wintertime, welcome to winter, if this is summer in the northern hemisphere, then this is winter in the southern hemisphere, and somebody at 42 degrees south latitude is sitting right about here. They're not going to see many satellites in the middle of the night because they're pretty deep in that well. You're talking about it's almost February, right? It's going to become more noticeable soon that the daylight hours are growing longer. Start looking for Earth satellites. They're out there. Forget the robins. They're here all year now. It's the satellites that herald the coming of spring. Information about a given pass. You have to believe you're at the center of this thing, and here are the directions. Never eat soggy watermelon. There it is. And in this particular pass, shows the ISS appearing about 10 degrees above the west-southwest horizon, heading this way, reaching a maximum height of 66 degrees, and heading over this way, disappearing 31 degrees above the northeast horizon. Why does it disappear? It heads off into the sun. It heads into the darkness of the Earth, into the shadow of the Earth. Now here's homework assignment number 2. The first one was to go look at YouTube videos. So homework assignment number 2. If you've never looked at the space station with a pair of binoculars, I think you should really get out there and do it, especially on a pass where they're going to pass into the shadow of the Earth. They're experiencing sunset. And just like we see pretty orange colors at sunset, so do they. And if you've ever looked at the space station, especially even just a pair of binoculars, as they go into the shadow and they're getting fainter, sometimes you can see that deep orange color of the twilight glow. It's really pretty cool to see. What I also like to do, and for this I use 10 by 50 binoculars. If I'm being really lazy, if I don't want to take a telescope out to look at the space station, I'll grab a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars. They are so big that you can, in the binoculars, 10 power, you can see the distinction between the cream color of the module of the station itself and the red solar panels. It looks like a headlight, white, and then another headlight, a tail light. You can see it with a pair of binoculars. So that's your homework assignment, to go out and do that. That's one of them. Besides as a teacher, right? Yeah. And they're always homework assignments.
What's the angular size of the space station the closest approach?
Well, I can't give you a number, but later in the slide, you'll get some idea of it. In a telescope, I'll tell you right now, in a telescope, medium 30 power, 40 power, you can see the modules, you can see the solar panels. And the way I like to do it, and there's your other homework assignment, if you've never looked at the space station through a telescope, do it. Do it. Get a low power field of view. I like to catch them on the passes that are going to come up overhead. They're hard to track. And I mean, they're moving 5 miles a second. They're covering a lot of ground. And when they're going straight overhead, they're really, really hard to track. And one of the last times up at the clubhouse, I was moaning about Dobson's hole. You know, a lot of us have become azimuth kind of guys, but when you get a telescope straight, the Dobsonian straight up, you got to roll it around and flip it over. It's hard to watch it go across the meridian, the zenith. But I like to catch it on these passes that are coming like this at us, because they may be far away when they're only 20, 30 degrees above the horizon, but they're coming at you straight head on, and so the movement across the sky isn't very intense and it's very fast. So you can actually track it a little bit easier. I also like the passes that are going to make about a 40-degree pass across the sky, because then I just have to worry about just keeping it sort of on that path, and I can see it better that way. So how do you know when to look? Well, the internet is a miracle, and heavensabove.com has been around for quite some time, and it shows you the current position of the space station every time you click on. But you've got the space station, the Tiangong Chinese satellites, and North Korean satellites. I printed this off yesterday. This is yesterday. Hubble Space Telescope. You can look at their database. You can look at daily predictions. You can look at iridium flares. There's a huge amount of information on this website alone for how to see satellites. But what you have to tell it, first of all, is where are you observing from? Because then it'll make the predictions work for you. And so this is a place that should be familiar to many of us. It's the clubhouse up at Westford. And I told Steve I was going to give him a shout out. That's Steve's concrete pad right there that he likes to observe from. There's the clubhouse, of course. There's the roll-off. There's the Ario. There's the clamshell. That's the doghouse. That's the vehicle assembly building, right? You guys know it, right? And that's Steve's concrete pad right there. So I figured I'd just point it right there and set it up for that. So you can find your house if you want. You could just tell it Westford, and it would give you adequate predictions. But if you want to get really...
This must have been like taken on a Saturday or something.
It must have been a work party day.
Yeah.
Yep. We could go look and see. I think it would tell you when it was taken. Anyway, that's just Google Earth. What's that?
John Mars there, it's his white van.
Where's the way? Oh, right here?
Yeah.
There you go. He's probably working right in there. If he were walking, we'd be able to see him. You know, pretty good stuff.
You could put it in street view.
That's right. You can put it in street view. That's right. That's right. But anyways, this is on Heavens Above. I just point that position. And then what it'll do is if you want it to look at the ISS, it'll give you visible passes. So here's one for Saturday. Now right now the space station is making early morning passes. So if you want to see this one, which is a pretty good one, passing almost overhead at 5:45 and 20 seconds, it'll come into the sunlight about 39 degrees above the northwest horizon, pass almost straight overhead, and then be gone again by 5:49. So you can see this is basically a 4-minute and 20-second pass. You have to sort of set your clock. If you are even a few minutes late, they're gone. Well, I like to always say astronomy waits for no one. Right? That lunar eclipse at the end of the month is going to come and it's going to go, but we're not going to see it.
And that's what happened when you were a kid.
And that's what happened for my poor dad.
Yeah.
That's right. When we was carting the kids into the house, the satellite went overhead. And what's even better though is if you click on the date, you get a map of the sky, and it'll show you where to look. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So there are resources that we can use. Heavens Above is the one I go to. CalSky is another really good one. Now this is a little dated because it gives some information here for the space shuttle, and they've retired the fleet. But you know, you've got a sat library. You've got selects. You could pick in individual satellites. It gives iridium flares, tumbling iridiums, decaying satellites. It's a pretty good website. I don't like the output very much. I like Heavens Above better, but for geostationary satellites, this is my go-to. CalSky's got some great stuff on geostationary satellites. They're on the somewhere.
Big one, right?
Where is it? Where do I see it?
On the very far left.
Oh yeah, right there in bold. That's why I missed it.
I like the one next to that too.
What's that?
The one next to that is good too.
Oh, the radio amateurs, right? You were just telling me to do some radio amateur stuff. Yep. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do with these things. There are some real-time displays. I've got a nice app on my phone. This is a website that'll tell you exactly where the space station is at any given time. NASA TV has got high-def video from live feed from the space station. So sometimes I'll run two screens at once, where I look to see where they actually are, and then I look at the live video imaging from the space station to see. I watched them go by one night. I was looking at live feed from the space station and watching them go across the sky. I was like, that's so cool. It's so cool. So now that we know how we can go find these things, now what? So I talk about what goes up must come down. I talk about curious satellites. I talk about ever been flashed by a satellite, that is. How about secret satellites? There are ones that, what do you mean it doesn't move? And then we'll save the best for last. So what goes up must come down. Back when the US was launching space shuttles up the East Coast, 51.6 degree orbit, you could literally go outside and watch these guys come up the East Coast. And I'm very hopeful that when this new SLS system gets up and running, we'll be able to do the same sort of thing. The space shuttles use solid rocket boosters to give them a kick, and those were gone 30 seconds after launch. So you had to be reasonably close to the Kennedy Space Center in order to see those solid rocket boosters. Now here we are up here, well within this limit of visibility of main engine cutoff. Anybody ever go out and do space shuttle observations at night? Every nighttime launch, I'd be out there. I don't care what time of night it was. We were out there looking at them. Did you ever use a telescope? Yep. The exhaust plume was like a flying V. It was a candle flame orangish color and a nice flying V. I never measured the angular dimension to see how big that thing really was, but it had to be big because we were picking them up off the coast at about T+7 minutes. So they were barely up to the coast of Virginia when we would right out come over our horizon, and then for about a minute and a half or so, you could see them with main engines on. Now the show wasn't over at main engine cutoff. What they did then was if you waited a moment, maybe 10 seconds, there was a burst of pyrotechnics which released the main fuel tank, that big orange fuel tank. And then the orbital maneuvering system engines on board the space shuttle would flash, like I used to call it the firefly effect. You ever watch a firefly in the summertime? It's flash, flash, flash. Flash, flash, flash. And so if you follow the track of the space station across the sky, you could actually see those orbital maneuvering engines maneuvering the space station, the space shuttle, away from the fuel tank and fine-tuning the orbit. So hopefully someday we'll be able to see that again. Walt's flight facility in Virginia is now launching more and more stuff for NASA. My middle son lives in DC, and so he's my eyes on the sky because he's only about 120 miles away from the launch site. It's actually quite a drive for him to get there, so he has never gone out there to see that. But they launched some pretty good stuff. The Laddie launch, it was a lunar probe, was launched in September of 2013 on a Minotaur 5, straight out from the flight facility at Wallops Island. About 11:30 at night, some delays during the evening. Sean climbed up on his roof, my son in DC, and he was my eyes. I had a bunch of people with me, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting. I said, well, he'll tell us if it goes. And all of a sudden, on the phone, he's yelling and screaming how bright it looked from where he was. It was brilliant, going across the DC sky. And we talked for another few seconds, and I was like, okay, gotta go. And we saw it. Now, Chris Cook on Cape Cod took this time exposure of the launch. To give you some idea of how low this was in the sky, here's Sagittarius here. That's the handle of the teapot in Sagittarius. The stars of Capricornus are in here. That's Capricornus. So this was fairly low, but there's the second stage. And I told the folks I was with that I always do my homework. If you're going to go out and do this, you got to do your homework. I said there's going to be a 19-second delay between the end of when the second stage cuts off and when the third stage comes on. So what you got to do is you got to make believe you're still following it, And 19 seconds is going to seem like a really long time, but be patient and wait for it. And when that third stage engine came on, oh, it's hard to see here. Come up and look at it on the computer screen at some point later. This was a smoke ring. It blew out a smoke ring that you could see in the pair of binoculars. And then the smoke trail from the third stage, as I was watching it, I'd run back down the exhaust smoke trail to see what the smoke ring was doing. Oh, it was so cool. It was just awesome to see that. So they give you visibility charts like this, so you can get out there and see this kind of stuff. Spaceflight Now lists current events. About 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago now, the Chinese were due to launch a rocket. This is an India launch sometime tonight and tomorrow. 11 o'clock tonight. Chinese are going to launch something again on Saturday. SpaceX is launching a Tesla into deep space sometime late in January. There's a Tesla, like an $100,000 car in the nose cone, and they're going to launch it into deep space. Just to show, just because Elon Musk can afford it. Set it up. But it's the Falcon Heavy. It's a demonstration launch to show that they're capable of launching heavy payloads into space. It's the first time they've ever set this up, so that should be something interesting to watch. More about that later. So there are websites that will tell you when things are going to go up, but things must come down. What goes up must come down. And this is from heavensabove.com, showing the height of the space station over the last about a year. And you can see, because of atmospheric drag, every now the space station is always feeling that braking effect of the ultra-thin atmosphere. They're about 240 miles high, and every now and again they have to boost them up, just a little bit, just a kilometer or so. They use the cargo vessels that they have attached on there to do that. But if they didn't do that, it would eventually fall back to the Earth. Aerospace.com lists up-and-coming re-entries. And so you can go online and look at their website, and you can see the sorts of satellites that they're worried about, and they give you all kinds of information about them. The one I'm particularly interested in is this one. This is Chang'an-1, the Chinese space station, that's now expected to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere sometime in March. So this will be one to watch. And as you get closer, whoever they are, might have some better idea of when this one's actually going to come back to the Earth. It's 34 feet long and 11 feet wide, and pieces of this will survive passage to the Earth. No doubt about it. And it's not a controlled re-entry. They're just going to let it fall wherever. This is the prediction curve for the altitude, and you can see that things become a little dire for the spacecraft as we get into March. The error bar gets bigger and bigger, but once again, they'll fine-tune that as you get closer. It's in a 42.7 degree orbit, which means that although the chance is really small, there's a chance that we'll be able to see it re-enter from here in New England. And because pieces of it will fall back to the Earth, there's a chance it might fall in your backyard. Get that meteorite guy back here, and maybe we can trade it for his $4,000 palisade. Right? That little shiny one he had was $4K. I told him no. But that's everybody who lives in the green and yellow may have pieces of this thing fall down on top of them. The space shuttle used to have the main fuel tank come off. Very cool picture. If you were in the right place at the right time, you could see the re-entry of the main tank. This was from Hawaii, on one of the very early launches. But it's a shower of sparks as it disintegrates in the Earth's atmosphere. You can see the thing fragments, and each fragment becomes a meteor that you can see across the sky. And so it's always fun to watch something like this come through. And so you can look for predictions of these sorts of things as well. Not bad, huh? Curious satellites. What about Ed White's glove? In June of 1965 on Gemini 4, Ed White opened the hatch, went out and did the first spacewalk. And in the middle of the spacewalk, this glove floated out of the space capsule and became a satellite of the Earth. Now, honestly, there's no way you would have been able to see that. First of all, in 1965, what do we have, like 3 channels of black and white TV? That was it. There was no internet. There was nothing. You would have no idea where to look for such a glove. But it was small. It probably wouldn't be very bright anyway. But it was in orbit for a little while. But I'm sure it's decayed. Sometimes, though, when I'm looking through my telescope and I see a faint satellite moving through the eyepiece, I go, I wonder if that's Ed White's glove. Back a while back, there was a little bit of a problem at the space station where one of the astronauts lost this $100,000 tool bag. That was in orbit for a while. You could see that, but it decayed. It kind of, in the video, it seems to be drifting away from the station towards Earth. So given enough time, it burned up in the atmosphere. But that was visible from the ground. And there was the tethered satellite experiment. I don't know if you remember that. There was an experiment set up on board the space shuttle to see if you could take a long conductor and extend it out from the cargo bay of the space shuttle, and passing through the Earth's magnetic field could we generate electricity. Well, the first attempt, I don't know how far it unspooled, but somebody missed that there was a screw that jammed it up and it wouldn't unfurl the whole way. So they rolled it back into the cargo bay, they fixed it, and then they sent it up again. And on the second attempt, the tether was about 12 miles long, and it was generating electricity, and they think, if I got this right, I'm no expert, remember, that it was arcing in the cable, it sort of short-circuited and broke. And so now the astronauts on board the space shuttle were worried about this 12-mile tether that kind of sprang away, at least it sprang away from the shuttle. And you could see that for a few weeks if you lived in the southern part of the United States. It was a 28.5-degree orbit, so you had to be down there to see it. But people could actually see it. Who was I talking to tonight that's seen it? I can't remember. Oh well, somebody saw it. Pretty cool, huh? What about flashes? The Aries flasher. Remember that from 1985? It was a group of Canadian observers that were looking towards the constellation of Aries-ish Perseus and saw a bright flash. And it was close enough back in the day to, gamma ray bursts. Late 1960s, the United States sent some satellites into orbit to look for gamma rays. And what they were designed to do was to test for above-ground nuclear test ban violations. I guess nuclear weapons, when they detonate above ground, spew out gamma rays. They saw gamma rays, but they were coming from the universe. And so I suspect the people up in Canada, when they made this observation, were thinking that this was such a transient event that maybe, just maybe, it was the visual output of a gamma ray burst. Turned out it was just a satellite glint, reflecting some sunlight. And that was the end of that story. But that was big doings back in the day. I wish Mario were here tonight, because Mario was pretty instrumental in getting imaging some optical afterglows from some of the gamma ray bursts. But you know about iridium flares. I'm sure you've all seen iridium flares. They're pretty amazing. New Year's Eve at the clubhouse, what was the temperature about? Nothing. And I dragged everybody outside to look at a -7th magnitude iridium flare. And it was pretty bright, it was pretty impressive. And I promised folks it would only take a few minutes, so we bundled up and went out and looked at it. We also saw a flash of light just before the iridium satellite that we were there to look for came by. And when I went back into the clubhouse, it was bright, it was a moment, just a brilliant flash of light. And it was a tumbling iridium satellite, one that's out of control, and so we just happened to pick up a bright reflection off, one of the antennas. Iridiums are cool to watch. If you've never seen one, homework number, whatever, go out and look at iridiums. A lot of people think it's the solar panels here that are causing the reflections, but it's actually these antennas. They were communication satellites built by Motorola in the 1990s. And I guess they're being used by the military today, and I guess SpaceX is launching the next generation of them. But the ones that are up there now, turns out that these antennae, which are about the size of a doorway, like that door over there, and they're highly reflective. And it didn't take amateur astronomers long to pick up these reflections, actually see them. And they can be remarkably bright. They can be -8th magnitude, which is pretty impressive. If you weren't so transfixed at looking at the -8th magnitude flare and had the presence of mind to turn around and see your shadow. Because -8th magnitudes, that's not far off from the brightness of a full moon. Now, they last maybe 15 or 20 seconds.
They're being retired though. They're
I know.
deorbiting.
I know. Oh, they're deorbiting them? Oh, that's too bad. Well, they're not instantaneous flashes. You will see the satellite. It's brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter as this footprint of sunlight comes up towards you and passes over you. And like I said, they can get pretty bright. Secret satellites. There are some secret satellites you can look at. The NOS satellites were naval reconnaissance satellites that were using radio interferometry to pinpoint the location of ships and submarines. It's very secret stuff. These were tethered satellites that would move together in the sky. They were literally tethered together to do the interferometry. Now, if you want to keep secret satellites secret, don't pass them over a field with 4,000 or 5,000 amateur astronomers in it looking up. 1996 in Stellafane, the NOS 2-2 passed over Stellafane and was observed by many, many people. So much for being secret, right? I always thought that was kind of cute, and because they were fairly visible, and you can still see NOS constellations today, but they're pretty faint. I think they've gotten, and I'm not so sure the ones today are tethered together, but they fly in tandem. They're pretty cool. Lacrosse satellites are CIA satellites. They'll be the size of that thing. We can see that from a mile away. Those are pretty bright satellites to see, and they look kind of orangish gold when you see them in the telescope. You can't see them. I think Ron Dantrowitz had imaged some lacrosse satellites, and you talk about the FBI showing up. I think somebody showed up and was like, "We need to see how you're doing that," because they're pretty secret stuff. X-37B space planes. They look like little miniature space shuttles. They fly those all the time, but within a couple of hours after they've launched the thing, you can go on heavensabove.com and you can know when it's going to pass over your head. So much for secret. So those are secret satellites. And what do you mean it doesn't move? These are the geostationary satellites. Kind of a new sub-hobby of mine. Homework number 8. If you want to see geostationary satellites, come up to the clubhouse on Saturday night, not dark of the moon, and we'll show them to you. Sometimes I commandeer Steve's 18-inch telescope, and we look at them in 18-inch telescopes. They're kind of cool to watch. They don't move. They're parked in an orbit that is about 23,000 miles above the equator, and they orbit the Earth once every day. So they stay put. They're, for the most part, motionless against your position. They're TV satellites, they're internet satellites, they're communication satellites, and they just sit there, and they like to cluster them. See how there are like 5 here? I've had 4 of them in the same eyepiece field on one night.
How do you distinguish them from the star field?
Well, that's a good question, because that's the tricky part to actually figure out where to look for them, right? So let me go a little bit further. I'll explain how I find them, and this is one of my great geostationary satellite secrets that I'm going to share with you and the viewers at home tonight. That's my fucking.
It'll be a homework assignment.
It's another homework assignment. But here's the problem with trying to observe them. Eastern Massachusetts is pretty rough. You know, here's Boston. We're right here, right there. There's Worcester. There's Springfield. There's Albany. You know the rest. It's a mess. The sky's pretty bright, and these guys, the geostationaries, are not particularly bright. They're 10th, 11th magnitude, 12th magnitude. At the clubhouse last summer, we saw on 2 occasions naked-eye geostationary satellites. They do pick up solar reflections, and you can sometimes see them. These were 3rd magnitude geostationaries. The first one I saw was very bright. The first one I ever saw was very bright. But the problem is that you need some aperture to see them, which is why we kind of commandeer Steve's telescope. It's got that nice 18-inch guy. You need to get out in the dark or have some aperture to be able to ferret these guys out. Like I said, they're probably 10th to 12th, 10th to 13th magnitude. So you need some aperture from a bright sky. Yeah, you got to get up there a little bit. 10-inch scope might be a challenge. Might be a challenge in a 10-inch scope. You just have to be patient. How do you find them? You head them off at the pass. Now, a number of years ago, Sky and Telescope published this map and this map. Whoops, no, that's okay. We'll just do that. We'll get it out of the way. There. For finding a little speck of rock that was going to pass close by the Earth. 2005 YU55. Just a little speck of rock. And they gave nice finder charts for it. And before this guy came by, I wanted to see it. So I took my telescope out and I tried in the past to find these faint little rocks, and they can be pretty hard to find. It's actually hard to find them when they're just another 12th magnitude star in a star field, especially if they're not moving very fast. Anybody get out and look at Phaethon earlier? Right? A few of us saw that. It wasn't moving fast across the star fields. And trying to find one faint star amongst a bunch of faint stars can be kind of challenging. The nice thing about having a finder chart, knowing where it's going to be, is I went to this little asterism right here. And I knew that on this night, at about 8 minutes before 9 o'clock, that satellite, that rock was going to pass by that point in the sky. So I waited for it to come to me. It's too frustrating to go try to find it, so I let it come to me. Sure enough, right when it was supposed to be there it is. And now we can just track it across the sky. I do the same thing for the geostationary satellites. Close up, sorry. Turns out that from this latitude, now here's the secret, turns out from this latitude, the geostationary satellites, because of a little bit of parallax, are in an arc across the sky that's at declination -6 0.5 degrees. It's a little bit of parallax. If we were at the equator, they'd be straight overhead. You look at the celestial equator in the sky, and the arc of these geostationary satellites is at minus 6.6 degrees. It turns out that that's right, sorry, this is Scutum, this is Aquila, that's M11. Turns out it's actually one of my favorite clusters in the sky. This is from Guide 9.0. Here's M11. Now, this is inverted for the telescope. This little triangle of 11th magnitude stars here, 11th magnitude stars, mind you, defines the edges of what I like to call the corridor. This right here is about minus 6.5 degrees declination. So in the summertime, when I want to find geostationary satellites, I go and enjoy my favorite cluster of all time, and I keep my eyes on this part of the sky here. Now, in the Dobsonian, you're kind of pulling along, or you can, if you have an equatorial mountain, you've got a clock drive. I have a platform for the 20, it's driven. So I just park it on that thing, and I wait and I watch. And then every now and again, you'll see a little satellite that appears to be going through the star field really, really slowly. That's one of them. I shut the drive off, park the telescope on it, and it stays motionless as the star field goes by. And that's how we find them at the clubhouse. We'll go to the wild duck cluster, M11, we'll be very patient, and we'll wait a few minutes and we can pick them up that way. And with a little bit of aperture, they're actually pretty easy to see. Sounds like I lost my mic.
Yeah.
Sounds like, did I kill the battery? Is the battery's out? I'll have to use my teacher voice. Perfect. No, that's okay. I'll be fine. So that's how I find them. And I promise you, if you come up to the clubhouse in the summertime, we can show you these guys. They're clustered. Some of them are clustered. Really pretty neat to look at. But that's how I find those. And there's a time exposure one right there. There are space stations. And I know I'm running a little long, so I'm going to speed it up. You guys remember Skylab? That was nice and big. That was up in the 1970s. I used to like to watch the parade of the pieces of Skylab as they were constructing it. That was pretty cool. Mir was the Soviet space station. Was a spindly looking thing. That was up until the mid-1990s, I think. That was a nice, easy, and fun thing to see. They splashed that down in the Pacific Ocean. Tiangong, we talked about that already. That's coming back, at least the first one is coming back 2 months. But it's the International Space Station that's kind of the granddaddy of satellites now. And again, I promise you, with almost any optical aid, with about 30 power, you can see the modules, you can see the solar panels. It's pretty cool. Ron Danzowitz just showing off over the deck. Images like this, you're not going to see it like that in a backyard telescope. That's impressive. That's impressive. Enough of that. Bruce Berger, give him a shout out. Sent a website out a while back on how to find, it calculates transits.
Right.
About a year ago, maybe?
Right.
And Sal, you were asking me about the physical dimension of the space station. You know you can see the crater Tycho in a pair of binoculars. And so you can see, for this given, click, 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 pass across the face of the moon. It's got some physical, it's got some real dimension. You can actually see it. It's pretty cool. Just compare it to the craters you look at all the time in your telescope. And it's easy to see. It's easy to see. Sometimes a solar transit. And of course, that's I don't know which one, but that's a space shuttle right there.
Cal Sky will allow you to calculate this.
Yeah, we will too?
Yes,
Okay.
because I've done, Eileen and I have actually observed an image
Oh, nice.
of a moon, ISS.
Nice. I have too, but I've used Bruce's program.
Yeah.
And just before I'll forget it, Sal said Stellarium will give you nice predictions for satellite passes, including iridium flares. Stellarium is an amazing piece of software. You should all have it downloaded on your computers. Every iThing you own should have a copy of it on.
It's free.
It's free. Yeah, I think on the iPhones, I think they found a way to charge you a little bit for it.
Yeah, it's $1.99.
Yeah, well, best $2 you'll spend on any given day.
Yeah.
Buy two. If you're going to do this, you have to use safe solar work, right? You can't be looking at the glare of the sun, but these transits last about a second, about 1 second. Less. They're fast, so don't blink. But here's the ISS Transit Finder. I use auto detect to tell me right where I live. I push the button to calculate, and for example, this is one for tomorrow morning. If you were so inclined, it's going to be raining, of course, but this is a close pass by the moon tomorrow morning. And if I show it on the map, I think that's the next page images here. It gives you a nice map of where you can zoom in on this, and you can call up the satellite imagery, and you can see which parking lot you want to be sitting in. And you can go look at these things. It's I like to pick them when they're close to home at a convenient time. But I do go out and I look at them, and I put the solar filter on the telescope, put it on the sun, set an alarm, because you literally blink twice and you've missed this. I've never seen one go by the moon, but I've done a couple of solar ones, and they're really cool to watch.
Have you ever photographed them?
No, not yet. Soon, I'm working on that. That's one of the multitude of projects I have that I'm working on. But you can actually see it. Don't blink, and try not to follow it. Just let it happen. If you try to follow it, it's gone before you can actually latch onto it. But you'll see the panels, you'll see the modules. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Well, I think that's the last slide I have tonight. I think. So this is a blank slide that leaves into my the end. But I really encourage you guys to get out and, when I say guys, I mean everybody, male, female, everybody. Children of all ages, get outside and look up at the sky. Please, come up to the clubhouse. Please, we love to have people come up and observe with us. And we'll show you some of this stuff. If you're not familiar with it, we'll show you how to observe these things. And it just might add a whole new side to your amateur astronomy experience. If you're looking for something new, if you're bored at looking at, I don't know how anybody can be bored at anything. But if you want something new, check out satellites. They're up there, and so there it is. There's the last slide. That's the end. Thank you for your patience. I'm not much of an expert, but I can try and answer questions. You guys probably know more information about this stuff than I do. But gosh, I just love to go out and look at this stuff go by. So, any questions? I mean, I could try. Any questions?
By the way, that's my sort of the ISS.
Oh, there you go. The ISS gets to be about -4th magnitude on some passes. And they can even pick up, you can actually see specular reflections. So you can, off the solar panels. So you can, sometimes the ISS gets remarkably bright. And it's pretty impressive. Impress your friends and neighbors. They won't believe how you knew it was coming by. What's up, man?
I was going to say, when I did a lot of variable star observing, I was looking toward a variable star in the constellation of Redness. I remember seeing something blinking. Do some of these geostationary satellites actually spin and you get a blinking?
Well, some of the geostationary spin, I've heard, just tonight we were talking about it. But what you're more apt to see are satellites that are no longer functional. They're not being held in a specific attitude, and so they're tumbling end over end. Was it last night? Yes, last night. The Japanese Earth Observatory, ALOS, made a nice pass over New England, and that one flares and flashes pretty nicely. It's tumbling, and so if you're lucky enough to catch some of the bright reflections off of it, then that's a really nice one. If you want to get started on flashing satellites, the ALOS is a really, really bright one. And boy, it really flashed last night pretty brightly. Do you want me to look at that camera? Or you want me to just candid? Shooting pictures on you. Sure.
There's a difference between geostationary and geosynchronous satellites.
Yeah, let me see if I understand it. I think the geosynchronous satellites are ever so slightly inclined to the equator, which means they roll up and down over the course of probably a day. And it gives them a little bit more coverage. The geostationaries are pretty much parked right where they are. And like I said, they're communication satellites, they're TV satellites. They're broadcasting from South America to West Africa. Those like this, they're pretty much parked in place. But the geosynchronous ones will move up and down. I just haven't been patient enough to watch them do that. But yeah, they're out there. So it's a very different distinction, yeah. If I understand it correctly, that's what that is. What else? What other questions you guys have, you folks have? Yes, sir.
Just a quick, in cellophane about 8 years ago, I had a reflector set up at night, and someone announced that the International Space Station was coming over. And I said, what the heck? I tried to lead it, and I put it in a likely spot, and for like 1-2 seconds, I saw it whiz by, and it was quite impressive.
It is really impressive to look at. It's not just a speck of light. Think about the transit image I just showed you. It's not a speck of light. You can actually see it. Now you can't share that observation with anybody because you're struggling to keep it in your eyepiece. I have a Meade ETX that I sometimes take on the road, and it allegedly follows satellites. If you probably have to align the daylights out of it and then give it fresh orbital elements. I've never tried it. I don't know that the motors would keep up with it, but the 16-inch at the club will. You know, you just have to load in fresh orbital elements, and you could actually let that thing track the space station and just walk with the eyepiece as it's moving. That 16-inch, that mount will do it. That mount will do it. Yeah, that's something we should try. We should try that. Then if you hook up a camera to it, that's probably what Dan would say, to get that uber high resolution image, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, right?
Oh, yeah. It's a pretty high-speed tracking system that they've got, so
Yep.
not a problem to do imaging from there.
So I just, every now and then, just for kicks, I go out and look at it. If you're going to look at the space station through a telescope and you have more than 8 inches, you may want to throw a moon filter on there because it gets pretty bright and it gets glaring, you know. So if you want to see more details, or just stop it down a little bit so the brightness doesn't overwhelm you. I don't know. Ever since that first night when I didn't see Echo, to now I've always been intrigued by these things. You see them all the time. You see them all the time. Yes, Steve?
I remember back in the 60s, you could call right here to the Smithsonian, and they had a recording when Echo 1 and 2, probably Echo 2 by the mid-60s, when it was passing over our area. And it was pretty good.
Yeah, Echo 2 was
many times.
because of that, right? It was bright, right? Echo was bright.
It was always a gold color.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was
cool.
Just really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of it's just kind of a fun. Like I said, you're going to see them anyway, so you might as well learn a little bit about them and just enjoy them more. Yes, Alan.
So if you're looking in a particular direction with your telescope and you see something go through the eyepiece, which software can you use or which website to try to figure
Hard
out?
to say. Cal Sky and Heavens Above are going to share with you information about the brightest satellites. And if you go specifically look for them, you might be able, there's no way, I don't know of a good way to say, oh, that little faint guy, I saw it here in the sky at this particular moment. I don't know how to make any website tell me what that one was. So I don't know. I think U.S. Space Command tracks like over 20,000 pieces of stuff. They're everywhere now. And I see them all the time in the telescope. And if the object I'm looking at wasn't terribly difficult to locate, then I'm very prone to just go and follow that satellite for a little bit, just because. And I think about Ed White's Club. When I do it, you know?
There are several
There are
good
planetarium
apps.
programs like Starry Night that will actually show you the fainter satellites.
And I know Stellarium, the faint ones, Starry Night will do the faint ones too? Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Okay. I know
It usually
Stellarium
has like a dozen at a time.
Oh, okay. Stellarium will show you some of the brighter satellites. You click on satellites, and it'll give you, some pretty accurate predictions of when you can see some of the brighter ones. But I didn't realize Starry Night did the faint ones. See, that'd be cool if you just casually observe and go, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
But with heavensabove.com, at least the naked eye stuff, you can impress your friends because you'll know it's coming. You'll know they're coming, and you can invite people out to see the space station. And right on cue, there it is, and even more right on cue, you can tell them when it's going to disappear.
Yeah.
And they're just like,
How did you do
how
that?
did you know that?
But it's more impressive when you tell them there's people on there.
Yeah.
Astronauts.
That's right.
That is the more impressive.
Wait, because they might be waving back. I was at a star party at school in Framingham, my kids' elementary school one night, and there was a -6 magnitude iridium flare that drew applause from the crowd. You know, they actually broke into applause. They couldn't, and it wasn't for me. You know, I was the guy that just pointed, go look up in that part of the sky right there. And you know, when you're looking at a bright, especially the bright iridiums, invariably someone will see it before it gets really, really bright. And then you can key on it, and then you can point it out to everybody, and then you watch it get brighter and brighter and brighter, and then it dims and dims and dims and dims, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. They're normally about 6 magnitudes. They're kind of hard to see until they flare. But they're worth it. Go out and look it up. Boy, go look at a -7th or -8th magnitude iridium flare. Oh, check that out in your telescope. You lose your night vision fast.
For the invisible satellites, AMSAT launches a number of science experiments that carry amateur radio, and they're typically 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter.
Oh, the CubeSats, right?
Right, the CubeSats. Can't see those, but you can follow them with a small handheld beam antenna and use them for communication. It's pretty wild.
Well, I know the Russians launched a cube satellite, a 3-unit cube, that was going to deploy a Mylar reflector. That there was promise that it was going to reach -10th magnitude. That was from what I
Wasn't it some advertising gimmick or something?
I don't know, maybe. But it didn't. Apparently, it didn't unfurl because it never reached the brightnesses. I remember back in the 1980s. Wasn't there some? Maybe it was in the 1970s. The centennial of the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
Didn't they want to put a
Huge Mylar balloon.
a balloon or a ring of light or something? And there was great pushback from the astronomical community about how it was going to ruin their skies.
There was also going to be a push during the Vietnam War. They wanted to set up some type of really highly reflective satellite so you light up the landscape for night maneuvers in Vietnam.
Okay.
That didn't go.
Cool. No. So there's all kinds of neat things going on up there. I have another talk that I give on the James Webb Space Telescope. I got interested in that because I thought maybe, just maybe, with its big, giant tennis court-sized solar shield, highly reflective solar shield, that we might actually be able to see it. It's going to go out to the L2 point. Right now, the launch date is early 2019. It just came out of the cryovac chamber in Houston. I think it was in Houston, testing that would function in space at cryogenic temperatures. It's going out to L2, which is 932,000 miles away. It's a quasi-stable point, a gravitationally stable point. They're going to orbit it in a big, big halo orbit around L2 to keep it stable out there. L2 is not exactly 100% stable. And if you put a satellite at L2, it'll drift away. So you have to correct for that. So they're looking at about a 10-year lifetime for the James Webb Space Telescope. It's an infrared scope. They're going to keep the hot side hot and the cold side cold. Like in my talk, I talk about, remember McDonald's had that commercial in the 1980s? They're going to keep the Big Macs, the lettuce and tomato came on one side, and the hot bun came on the other, keeping the hot side hot and the cold side cold. The James Webb Space Telescope is a little more high-tech, do the same thing. But I talked to some of the folks down at the Space Telescope Institute in Maryland, and we communicated back and forth. And the woman I talked to went and talked to the engineers, and they don't think it'll be visible because it's not so much a specular reflection. We won't know when to look for specular reflections, but just normally they estimate about 20th magnitude out at L2, pretty far away. A tennis court at 1,000,000 miles out is pretty small target. So
Yeah, and it's also probably the angle isn't.
it has everything to do with the angle. That shield isn't flat, it's got some dimension to it, and so she came back with the line that the engineers suggest that unless the operators give us a heads up, there'll be no way to know when they're going to maneuver that telescope that we might pick up specular reflections. But after 2019, holy cow, we're moving things along here. Think about the James Webb Telescope. L2 is always in opposition, right? That's where L2 is. It's opposite the sun. So imagine a big orbit, about 20 degrees in radius, around the L2 point. If you see a big, bright specular reflection in that kind of region of the sky, it might just be the James Webb Space Telescope someday. So anyway, I blabbed long enough. It's 9:41 now. So anyway, enjoy the desserts. Thank you for your patience, and I just hope you had fun with that. I certainly did. Thanks very much.
Hey, no problem.
And if you want to come up and take a look at this moonwatch scope, I'll put it over here.
We appreciate you showing up tonight. Drive safely going home, and the meeting is officially closed.